Thank you for that song. It is not an easy thing to sing a cappella, but I think it is a really fantastic thing. Brother Pickens and I talk about this fairly often. It's a lot of the reason why our trio often will sing a cappella. It forces us to focus on the words. And that song, if we could ever actually come to the point that we believe I need thee every hour. As she was singing that, I was thinking, getting up here to preach, Lord, right now, I need thee. We need to be, wow, very powerful message in that song. I appreciate that song. 1 Samuel chapter 8. When you find your place to go ahead and stand this evening, 1 Samuel chapter 8. First Samuel 8, I'm going to start reading in verse 1. It says, "It came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judge over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba, and his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord, and the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should reign over them, according to all the works which they have done since the day I brought them out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee." Now skip down to verse 19 with me, chapter 8, verse 19 and 20. "Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel." Samuel, verse 9 through 18 is reasoning with them, trying to convince them of the poor choice that they're making. Verse 19, "Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles." And let's go ahead and pray. Lord, I want to pray that you will use this time that we have in your word tonight. Lord, I pray that you will speak through me. I pray that you'll help us to learn from this message and from your word this evening. I pray in your name. Amen. You can go ahead and be seated. This evening I have a really short introduction, so I'm going to go through my really short introduction. We'll get right into the message pretty quick tonight. But I want to start off by kind of making sure we're all on the same page of what's going on here. We have reached the end of the time of the judges, a time that last few weeks I've kind of stressed this, where a time where the people went back and forth between serving God and serving idols. That they would stray from God, and they would over and over do, as the Bible put it, do evil in the sight of the Lord, and they would serve the idols of either the idols or the gods that their fathers served in Egypt, or the gods of the Amorites, or the gods of the people of the land, and they'd serve these false gods, and because of it, God would send judgment on them, and then things would, with judgment, things get bad, and when things got bad enough, they'd cry out to God, and he'd send another judge to deliver them, and they would serve him for a while. And over this happened, and as much as they turned from God, and as much as they did evil and ran after false gods, we know that happened over and over. Through that time, God was their king. God was their king, and it had been that way since they left Egypt. They had men that God set in place over them. We know, Moses led for a while, and Joshua. We know about the different judges that came. There were men that God set in place over them, but that man was led directly by God. God being their king. Think of, the pillar of fire and the pillar of smoke. God was leading. And they here in 1 Samuel 8 decide God has been our king, God has been leading, we need a change. There needs to be a change. We need a king. And I have three things tonight that I want us to see about this decision. Their decision that we no longer want God to be our king, we want a king. First is, it was a decision to reject God. It was a decision to reject God. Look at verse 7. The Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. God makes it very clear to Samuel. They've not rejected you, they rejected me. This isn't personal, Samuel. I know that they mentioned your sons, because they do mention his age and they mention his sons, but this isn't about you, Samuel. And I think it's important for us to see, because it's easy for us to take, I'm going to word it this way, it's easy for us to take ministry personal, whether you're talking ministry as in pastoring or ministry as in teaching a Sunday school class or ministry as in whatever. It's easy to take it personal. If you're doing ministry of any kind, again, whether that's pastoring, teaching a Sunday school class, going out door knocking, if you're doing ministry of any kind, people say things and it hurts. Again, it doesn't matter what the ministry is. People don't always like what you do, and they may say things to you or about you that hurts, and that's easy to take personal. That's easy to take personal. It would have been easy for Samuel to take this personal. Hey, they immediately attacked my age and my children. For most dads, that's fighting words. Like, you go after me, most of the time I'm going to be pretty calm and okay with that. You go after my kids, and this is a whole nother story. Like, we're going to have a problem now. I mean, it would have been really easy for Samuel to take this personal. For Samuel to get real upset that, no, God, you don't understand. They called me old, and they attacked my children. This is personal. It's easy to take it personal. But it's not about me. It's about God. It's not about you. It's about their relationship with God. People say things and it hurts. People do things and it hurts. It's easy to take it personal and let it hurt you and cause us to become bitter. But it's not about you. It's about their relationship with God. This sounds, I don't know how to say this without it sounding super cynical, and I don't mean it that way. So please take it the right way. I've determined in my ministry, I don't really care what people think. As long as I know, I've just decided, as long as I know that I'm in God's will and doing what He's leading me to do, people can say or do whatever people are going to say or do, and I'm just going to keep serving God. Because people say and do some hurtful things. God tells Samuel, hey, this isn't about you. They didn't reject you. They rejected me. That's what he tells him. That's what he tells him. For they have not rejected thee, they've rejected me. They rejected God as their leader. Now, the concept behind this doesn't make sense. I have the last couple weeks tried to point this out as well, but it just keeps coming up in my study, and as we look at this, the concept behind it doesn't make sense. They have the ability to have the all-knowing, all-powerful God as their leader or a man. I mean, that's their options here. They have the option of, we can have God, who is the creator, the all-powerful, the all-knowing, as our king, or a man. Why would you choose a man? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. God has no limitations. God has nothing that catches him off guard. You think of that, God as your leader, you could never have a surprise attack against you because he knows. God as your leader, you never have an army stronger than you attack because he's all-powerful. They had that option, or a man who is limited in his strength, limited in his ability, limited in his knowledge. I mean, when when you take the time to actually think it through, it makes no sense as to why you would choose to follow a man rather than follow the leading of God in their lives, and yet it's what they did, and yet it's what we often do. As a child of God, we have the opportunity to follow God or to have God as our leader, living our lives following His leadership, His guidance, and yet we often instead choose the leading of a man, ourselves. We know Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, lean not on thine own understanding. Verse 6, in all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths. We have the opportunity to be led of God, and yet we choose our limited understanding. Children of Israel, they rejected God as their leader. They rejected God as their king, but they also rejected God as their God. Verse 8, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them out of Egypt, even unto this day therewith, they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. I don't remember if it was last week or the week before that I mentioned this and said at the time, I've never understood the mindset. They followed God, who proved Himself to be stronger than the gods of Egypt when He led them out, and they followed God as they went into the promised land, and God proved Himself time and time again to be stronger than the gods of the land, destroying one enemy after another, and yet time and time again they chose to reject God as their God and go after the gods of the Egyptians and the gods of the land. But as we've seen this last few weeks, we as children of God have the opportunity to serve the God of everything, the opportunity to serve the Creator, and yet very often we make the choice to serve the gods rather than the God. It's a choice to reject God. Look at what they wanted. We just read at verse 19 and 20. Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel and said, Nay, but we will have a king, that we may be like the other nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. The reason they wanted a king rather than to allow God to continue to be their king. We want a king to judge us. They had that. The Bible refers to God as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. They had a king who judged them. Not just a king, the king. They wanted a king to go out before us. They wanted someone to lead them. They had that in God. The good shepherd, the one who maketh us to lie down in green pastures and beside still waters. They had a king to lead. They wanted a king to fight their battles. Had they forgotten who fought for them when they left Egypt? I mean, had they forgotten about the Battle of Jericho? Had they forgotten about the many ways that God won the battles in the Promised Land to give them the land? Had they forgotten about the judges that God had sent to deliver them time and time again? They had a king to fight for them. Children of Israel here in this choice to have a king made a decision to reject God. Number two, this choice to have a king, it was a decision to be just like the world. We just read verse 19 and 20, start of verse 20, that we may be like all the other nations. We may be like all the other nations. It was a choice to be just like the world. Can I remind you, they weren't supposed to be like the other nations. They weren't supposed to be like everyone else. This was God's chosen people, set aside for Him. The children of Israel weren't supposed to be like all the other nations. They weren't supposed to be led like everyone else, and they weren't supposed to be judged like everyone else, and they weren't supposed to fight their battles like everyone else, and they weren't even supposed to worship like everyone else. They were God's people, and they were supposed to be different so that so that as they were led of God and worshiped God and winning battles by God, and even when they were judged by God, it pointed people to God. We weren't supposed to be like everyone else. Think about how many times in the Bible, from when they left Egypt to when they finished taking the promised land, that we see the people of the land fearing them because they had heard of their God. Because when they were living for God, how they were supposed to, it pointed people to God. It pointed people to God. It didn't point people to their might and their strength and their ability and their leadership. It pointed them to God. They weren't supposed to be like everyone else. They were tired of being different. They wanted a king like everyone else. They were tired of being different. They wanted to be like all the other nations. And before we get too, I guess, judgmental on that, just going to say this. I can, to a point, understand that. I grew up in a pastor's home. We were different. We dressed different than many of my friends. Growing up, I played in sports and those sorts of things, so I had friends outside of church. We dressed different than many of my friends. We talked different than my friends. We acted different than my friends, often even different than my church friends. And as a kid, I struggled with that. And I won't lie, there were times that I thought, hey, I'm tired of being different. Especially when I started working and, as a 16, 17, 18-year-old with coworkers, there are times you just want to be accepted and times of thinking, why do I have to be different? Can I tell you, it's not about me. It isn't about me. It's about pointing to Him. Children of Israel being different wasn't about the children of Israel. It was about their God. As children of God, we are to be different. 1 Peter 2:9, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye show forth the praises of Him who hath called you out of darkness into marvelous light. Now, we very often will use this verse and we'll look at the peculiar people. The next phrase in that ye should show forth the praises of Him who hath called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. There's a reason we're to be a peculiar people. It's not just to be weird. Like, we're not called to be a peculiar people because God thinks, it's just going to be funny to see a bunch of weird people running around down there. No, there's a purpose. There's a reason for it. To show forth praises of Him. Of Him. It's not about me. It's about pointing to God. As children of God, we are called to be different. A peculiar people. And I understand, like I said, I understand that at times we get tired, especially I think it happens with, as I gave the example, with kids who have grown up in church that thought goes through the mind that why can't we just fit in? But we're not called to fit in. We're not called to fit in. Let me just give you a few things here that we ought to be different in. Our churches are not to fit in with the world. I know with this church that isn't an issue, but I believe it isn't an issue because it's preached against regularly, because I see churches that I know better on a regular basis changing to fit in with the world. I had someone not too long ago say that churches have to change, that we need to. And they were very sincere in this, that churches have to change because in a church like ours, the world doesn't feel comfortable, so we'll never grow. Their mindset is a church like yours, visitors are going to come and they won't feel comfortable there, so they won't stay there. And I don't know how to say this nicely. The world isn't supposed to feel comfortable. That's called conviction, and it's good. That's what's supposed to happen. And if our churches change to where the world feels comfortable being here in sin, then there's nothing about this place that points people to salvation. And we can just come to church and feel good about ourselves because we did our good thing and go on about life living in sin. that's not how it's supposed to be. This place is supposed to be different. So that everything that happens in this place points to Christ, points to salvation, points to spiritual growth, points to a closer walk with God. We aren't supposed to be just like the world. Our families aren't supposed to be just like the world. I understand that makes things challenging. But our family dynamic and the things our families do and the places our families go are not to be just like the world. I get the challenge of this. It is, growing up, I didn't understand some of this until I had kids of my own. It's a hard thing to explain to your kids why they can't do the things their friends do. As a kid, I just thought my parents were mean. I didn't understand. Why not? As a parent, it's a hard thing to explain to your kids why they can't do the things their friends do. For that matter, it's a hard thing to explain to your kids why they can't be friends with that kid. But it's an opportunity to teach your kids, to point them to a closer walk with God, because we aren't supposed to be like the world. Our churches, our family, or us personally. We're not supposed to be like the world. Bible says, 1 Peter, that we just looked at a minute ago, that we are to be a peculiar people. A peculiar people. Typically, we don't like the concept of being peculiar, being different. We want to fit in. Even people who want to be peculiar want to fit in being peculiar. You ever notice that? Even people who want to be weird together. Portland, like their whole thing, keep Portland weird. So we're going to be different, all of us. Do you understand that when there's a million people being different together, you're not different anymore? Like that kind of defeats the purpose. There used to be, and I wish I could find it, I always thought it was the funniest thing. Dr. Pepper used to have a commercial, and I don't remember anything about the commercial except at the very end of it, everyone is wearing a Dr. Pepper shirt that says, "I am an individual." Like there's 500 people all crammed shoulder to shoulder. I am an individual. Well, no, you're not. Like if it was just you in that shirt, okay, maybe I'll give it to you, but not. It doesn't work when there's 500 people all being an individual together. Like that's not how that works. We don't like the concept of being peculiar. We want to fit in. Even when we're being weird, we want to be weird together. We want to fit in. We all want to be liked. And we think the way to be liked is to fit in. Let me just say this again. It just keeps coming up in tonight's message. It's not about you. It's the problem with that whole idea of, well, I don't want to be peculiar and I don't want to be different. I don't want to be weird. It's all on I. It's not about you. It's about God. If we could really grasp just that simple concept, it's not about me, it's about Him, our lives would be so much simpler. It's not about my comfort, it's about God. And it's not about my will, it's about God. And it's not about my desires, it's about God. Our lives would be so much simpler if we could grasp this idea that it's not about me. It's Him. The decision children of Israel made was all about them. It was a decision, a choice to reject God. The decision was to be just like the world. Number 3, it was a decision, I couldn't find a better way to word this, so this is what you get. It was a decision based on appearance. Look over chapter 9. I know we ended in 8 verse 20, but skip down to chapter 9 verse 1. So they have decided we want a king, and Samuel tries to talk them out of it. They're stuck on, nope, we want to be just like everyone else. So now they are at the place, okay, we've said this and we've stuck with this, now we need somebody. So they're looking around for who their king's going to be. Verse 1, now there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath. Why am I reading this verse? Verse 2 is the one I'm looking for. All of a sudden, it's like, this is not the verse I think it is. Verse 2, and he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man, and and a goodly, and there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward he was higher than any of the people. So these are God's people. And yet the decision as to who would lead them, they left God out of the decision. We know they've already rejected God. They had already decided what they were going to do, which is a dangerous thing when we decide that we know what we want before we ever bring it to God to find out what He wants for us. But that's what they do. Is they already know what they're going to do, and they're choosing their king. This is a big decision in their lives. This is a big decision in their history and in their future. And they completely left God out of the decision. If you're going to say, God, we no longer want you to be our king, you would think God's people would at least say, but will you help us find the right one? Like, will you help us find a decent one? Instead, they make the decision based on appearance. The Bible tells us why they chose Saul. They chose Saul because he was a choice young man. He was the goodliest man to look on in the entire kingdom, and he was tall. They picked Saul because he was tall, dark, and handsome. Like, that's what this is. This is not where I'm going to go with this point, but worth noting, if you're basing decisions off of appearance, you're making a mistake. Because things are never how they appear. Girls, if you're picking a guy because he's handsome, you're making a mistake. Guys, if you're picking a girl because she's pretty, you're making a mistake. Things are never how they appear, and that applies to a lot more than just people. Lisa and I, our house that we just sold, when we bought it, determined pictures online, house shopping, is the most frustrating thing ever because they lie. They lie. Like, whoever takes pictures for realtors is amazing at Photoshop. It's all of them, because we would look at houses that by the pictures you look at, and I mean, they were beautiful, and they were exactly what we wanted, and everything looked amazing. And then you went to it, and there were multiple that, man, by the pictures they were perfect. And we pulled up in the driveway, and I told Lisa, we're just not even going to stop. We're just going to keep driving by. They were terrible. Things are often not how they appear. But I want us to see this. The children of Israel made this decision based off of appearance rather than God. They based this decision off of their opinion. They based this decision of who would be their king, who is going to replace God for us, off of their opinion. I know this analogy is a little gross, but it holds very true, so bear with me. Opinions are like armpits. Everyone has a few, and they usually stink. This is a decision that would affect their lives. This is a decision that would affect their nation from here on out. And they didn't base it on God. They didn't even base it on fact. Nowhere does it say that Saul had formal training, or that he was a good military leader, or for that matter, that he had any leadership experience at all. They made a decision that would affect them for generations to come based on, this man is goodly looking. I don't think I can use enough sarcasm to display how dumb that was. I mean, seriously, that was their reason. Of the children of Israel, a goodlier person. There was not a goodlier person than he. That's how you choose your king? Man, he's handsome. He must be a good king. What? I mean, they made this decision off of their opinion, and their opinion stunk. Let me just tell you, any time we make a decision, big or small, anytime we make a decision based, and we base that decision off of our opinion, it's a bad decision. And the reality is, we do that very often. Very often, we make our decisions not based off of what God wants for us, because we forgot to ask Him, and we don't base it off of even facts or a proven track record. We base it off of emotion and opinion. And it never leads to good things. We've seen that time and time again this year. I know that our governor has said the word science and data a lot over this last year and a half. But just because you say science and data doesn't mean it's true. Just throwing that out there. Many of the decisions, and I know everyone's opinion on this is different, but many of the decisions made by our governor, by our president, and by individuals has been based off of emotions and opinion. I'm not saying every decision, but many of them have been based off of emotion and opinion. And when we do that, the outcome stinks. They made their decision for their king based off of emotion and opinion. They made this decision for their king out of desperation. Out of desperation. That's what this is. They want a king. They've rejected God. Samuel's tried to convince them otherwise, and they've told Samuel, no, we're not listening. We want to have a king just like everyone else. Everyone else has a king, so if we're going to be like them, that's what we have to do, is get ourselves a king. So they essentially just start looking around. Well, we've already told God it's not him anymore. We got to find someone, and oh look, that guy's tall. He stands out over everyone else. There's a big, handsome dude. He'll be a great king. It was completely off of desperation. We need someone, and he's available. When we make our decisions based on desperation, it always ends in a mess. Always. Conclusion night. Here's how I want to end this message. Try and wrap this together. The children of Israel made the choice that they wanted a king. They want to be like everyone else and have a king. And in it, they chose to reject God. They chose to be just like the world. And they chose off of appearance. And here's what I want to do here's what I want to end with. I want to look at instead, really quickly, what they should have done. And with that, what we should do. They chose to reject God, to be just like the world, and they chose off appearance. So what they should have done, they should have chose God as the king of their life. Not just like he was before, but where they were actually submitted to him. Because he was the king of their life before, but the constant swaying back and forth between we serve God, we serve false gods, oh no, we're in trouble, we'll run back to God again. That's not really serving God. That shows that they hadn't really submitted. Christian, choose God as your king. Really submitted to him so that where he leads, you follow. What he commands, you obey. Choose God as your king. What they should have done, they should have chose to be different than the world. They were God's chosen people, set apart for him, and they only embraced it when it benefited them. For us, we need to choose to be different. Recognize that it's more important that your life be different and pointing people to Christ than for you to fit in. Choose that you won't live like the world, and you won't talk like the world, and you won't go the places the world goes, and you won't do what the world does. Not so that it draws attention to you, but to point people to Christ. I often, when we're dismissing in prayer, it's something I say often, and it's not just repetitious words. It's something I really pray for us. It's often that I pray we would be a lighthouse. There's a reason for that. Think about this. A lighthouse shines that light out over the water. So you can see it through the storms. You can see it through the fog. You can see it through whatever from an incredible distance. Some of the lighthouses that there are, the distance that you can see that light from is incredible, but it doesn't shine so that people can see the beautiful lighthouse. That's not the purpose of it. I mean, they're cool. I love lighthouses. My mom, for a year, they every month would go visit a different lighthouses. They are very, very neat growing up. being in a coastal town, we had Coast Guard guys in our church. We got to go up in the lighthouses. They are really neat, and I'm not trying to take that away, but they don't stand out and they don't shine their lights so that you can admire the lighthouse. They're there to point out the rocks. They're not there so people in the ship would say, whoa, look at the cool lighthouse. They're there so people in the ship would pay attention to everything else around. We aren't to be a peculiar people so that people look at you and say, oh, he's really different. We're to be a peculiar people so that you can point them to him. Choose to be different than the world. What they should have done, they should have chosen God as their king. They should have chosen to be different than the world. And they should have chosen based off of God's leading. Rather than their own opinions and emotions and desperation, they should have sought God's leading. Let me just kind of, circle this back around. If he is your king, you'll follow his leading. And your decisions won't be based off of emotions or opinion or desperation. Your decisions will be based off the leading of your king. Of your king. So you all, any of you who have been here any time know I like ending messages with a question. I don't know why. It's just I like to end with something that makes me think. I think as I was studying this, God kept bringing this to my mind. Is Jesus, is Christ your king? Not just in word, because I truly believe everyone in this room would answer, well, yes, of course. Of course he's my king. But is he really? Are you really actually submitted to him? So that your decisions aren't based off of your emotions or your opinions or your way or even your desperation, but your decisions are based off the leading of your king. That's what I want to encourage tonight. Let's come to an altar and choose Christ as king of your life. Truly submitted to him. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you will use this time of invitation. Lord, I pray that you will help us. I think we can see in this decision made by Israel that they wanted to have a king just like everyone else, and we can see some major faults in it. We can see pretty clearly that in that they chose to reject you, and in that they chose that they wanted to be just like the world, and they chose off of appearance, off of just emotion and opinion. Out of their desperation, they made a decision rather than submitting to you. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to truly choose you as our king. Lord, help us to choose that we're going to be different from the world so that we can point people to you, Lord, and help us to choose off of your leading. To really come to that place where we can say, Christ is my king. That I am going to submit my life to him to lead me. Not just in word, not just because it sounds like the good thing to do, but really. Praise in your name. Amen. Let's go ahead and stand with heads bowed and eyes closed.